race of people be a genius? A race of geniuses? The very question is immediately troubling to many. But in truth, that is one of the ways the ancient Greeks and Romans thought about genius. The Latin genius is related to the Latin word gens, meaning a people. In Roman thinking, a genius or a genius could be the spirit of the gens, the spirit of a person or the spirit of an entire clan or an ethnic group. So the ancient Greeks and Romans, at least, thought a particular race of people might have a genius. That is to say, they believed that a people might have a special talent, or at least a proclivity for certain behavior, perhaps a capacity for exceptional human accomplishment. In modern times, such a belief has been the basis of two recent books about the Jewish people, Bernard-Henri Lévy's The Genius of Judaism and Norman Liebrecht's Genius and Anxiety, How the Jews Changed the World. Ironically, this same premise, that one group of individuals is genetically or racially superior to another, and ipso facto other groups are inferior, this idea was posited in the first book on the subject of genius and race, Hereditary Genius by the Englishman Francis Galton, published in London in 1869. Here Galton argued, more implicitly than explicitly, not only that one group was racially superior to another, which group Galton suggested, surprise, surprise, was whites of Anglo-Saxon descent, but also that that superior race or group should be encouraged to breed so as to grow itself, and the inferior ones should not. Galton's advocacy of genetic superiority, as you may know, marked the beginning of the theory of eugenics, and ultimately the extermination under German National Socialism of that one race that was said by the Nazis to be a genetically inferior one. Again, the Jews. Superior or inferior depends on the culture or people doing the judging. Obviously, the notion that any one race or ethnic group is superior is fraught with difficulties on many counts, but I'll pursue it here briefly, if only because it causes us to think, again, about how genius or exceptional human accomplishment comes about, and because books on genetic exceptionalism continue to be written. Here's another recent one, The Triple Package by my colleagues at Yale, Amy Cho, and her husband, Jed Rubenfeld. Likely, you know of her best-selling book, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. I know of her also because one of her children and one of my children used to play in the same chamber music group in New Haven, Connecticut. Anyway, the point of the Triple Package is to say that there are 8 races or ethnic groups that show a special propensity for success here in the United States. Chinese Americans, Nigerian Americans, Cuban Americans, Persian Americans, Iranians in other words, Jewish Americans, Asian Indian Americans, Lebanese Americans, and Mormons. As to those 3 special qualities that make up the triple package, the 3 special drivers that empower these ethnic groups, they are said to be 1, a superiority complex, quote, a deeply internalized belief in your group's specialness, exceptionality, or superiority, end quote. 2, quote, a feeling or worry that you, or what you've done, or what you have is in some fundamental way not good enough, end quote. And 3rd and finally, these ethnic groups are said to value impulse control, the ability to resist temptation, especially the temptation to give up in the face of hardship, end quote there. 2 points I'll insert here. As we will come to see, a feeling of superiority and self-confidence, as well as a discontent with the status quo, do seem to be enablers or drivers of genius. But the 3rd of these enablers, impulse control, seems far off the mark. Beethoven, Tesla, Picasso, Hemingway, and Faulkner, for example, were just a few of the many geniuses not, and I would emphasize strongly not, known for their impulse control. But the second and more important point here is that the authors Chua and Rubenfeld see the triple package as leading not to genius, but to success. Genius and success, again, are obviously different. We shouldn't hold the authors to a standard genius that they never for a moment intended to meet. Success is their benchmark, and they judge success, as do most Americans today, by such things as colleges attended, by professional salaries earned, by accumulated wealth, by positions held within corporations, governments, and academia, that sort of thing. They are not interested in exploring why different races are or are not creative, an essential aspect, I believe, of genius. But once again, here, in this particular discussion of race and ethnic characteristics, I have no particular standing. As a mongrel American, I have no strongly pronounced ethnic upbringing or ethnic experience. Thus, at this point in my Yale Genius course, I call upon students who do, often students of Asian descent, usually Chinese students and Chinese American students, to offer their perspective on the matter. Some years ago, a student of Chinese descent from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, named Sean Tan, was taking the Genius course and had especially insightful things to say about his Chinese upbringing versus an American one. The next year, though Sean had graduated from Yale, I invited him back by means of an audio hookup from Kuala Lumpur to talk to our class while I showed the PowerPoint slide presentation that he'd prepared. Sean has gone on to become a successful writer about Far Eastern politics, dividing his time between the Hoover Institute at Stanford and Hong Kong. What follows is a combination of excerpts from Sean's audio class feed, my comments, and his slides, which have been updated where possible to show statistics as of 2020. The issues at play here are these: discipline versus disobedience, the virtues of a homogeneous versus a heterogeneous society, collective uniform thinking versus individual contrary thinking, and ultimately creativity. As Sean talks, I'll show his slides.
By Asian, I'm going to define Asian today by saying Chinese, Japanese, or Korean. By that, I don't mean like Indian or Pakistani, just because those cultures are very different from those three, and I really don't know enough about that to talk about it. So, I mean, where do I come from? I'm from Malaysia, and I'm Malaysian Chinese, and Chinese in Malaysia make up 25% of the population. They're one of the biggest ethnic groups. So, let's move on to the Asian genius. This is, the picture of the Asian genius. I mean, at first he seems like completely untouchable, right? I mean, how do you measure up to that? And why is he untouchable? He has got many things going for him. He's a math whiz. He always seems to know the answer to every question. He always gets the top grades, almost never below an A. Plays at least one musical instrument well. He's a computer whiz, a workaholic. He wears glasses. I mean, how do you compete with that? Seriously, glasses. And why is Asian parenting? How do we get to this point, though? A lot of it is due to the difference between Asian parenting and Western parenting. And how is Asian parenting so successful? Well, I mean, for one, you're really disciplined. This is a cane. This is the kind of cane I used to get hit with like all the time when I was a kid. Like, it's an awful like rattan cane. My mom could buy it from like supermarket, and it wasn't very good material. Sometimes she'd cane you, and the cane would split in half, and then it would be like being hit with two canes, and that would just And these are just the stuff they see. They use this too. This too. And this is a typical scene from my childhood. Yeah, that brings back memories. Anyway, what is Asian parenting like? It's, Asian tiger parenting, right? We're obviously caricaturing things here. It's hierarchical, right? I mean, your parents are the authority typically, and it's difficult to question them. It's strict, right? You don't, talk back to or it's much harder to talk back to your parents. It's blunt, wherein they can tell you basically. Amy Chua gives the example. An Asian parent could say, "Hey, fatty, lose some weight," right? And that's something a Western parent would be a lot more hesitant to say. It's very focused. It keeps you concentrated in certain subjects or certain activities which your parents think are very important, and they tend to neglect a lot of others. And it's results orientated. It's not enough just to try your best. You have to be the best. Well, that's a meme that someone made of Amy Chua. But you can see the obsession it caused when Amy Chua wrote that piece about titled "Why Chinese Mothers Are Superior." I mean, Amy Chua herself is she's a very interesting person. I mean, she's an expert. She teaches in the law school, but she's an expert not just in law but in politics, economics, issues like democracy, and she's a hell of an impressive person.
After this introduction to Amy Chua, Sean next goes on to talk about why tiger parenting is effective. We'll pick it up from there.
So let's go on to why we think tiger parenting is effective. Because it's blunt, it's direct. Therefore, you don't waste time trying to communicate ideas. You can go right straight to the heart of the matter without tiptoeing around sensibilities. This saves time, obviously. It makes kids good at subjects that they like it, and it promotes a virtuous cycle. By being good at math, you start to get praise from your classmates and your teachers about math. And as a result, you want to do better in math, and you want to devote more time in math, and so you become better at it, and that creates a loop. And assumes strength instead of weakness. This means that you don't easily give up, right? There are no, as Bruce Lee said, there are no and because it assumes blame as well. As Bruce Lee said, there are no peaks, they're just plateaus, right? Perfection, almost by definition, is unattainable. You have to keep doing better and better, no matter what, even if you think you've reached the limits of how well you can do. And obviously, Asian parents have very high expectations. And we can see the results, actually, because while Asian Americans make up 5% of the population, they make up 17% of Ivy League undergraduates. In fact, they're so good at getting into top institutions that they have to be kept down by affirmative action policies, right? They have to do, someone did a study, and the average Asian has to score 140 points higher on the SAT than a white applicant with exactly the same credentials. And this is just in the Ivy League. In California, where they've made it illegal to discriminate against anyone for any reason at all, including ethnicity, they make up 46% of Berkeley's undergraduates. However, there are also lots of weaknesses in Asian tiger parenting.
Sean then begins to work through slides that give statistics about what seem to be, at first glance, the disappointing outcomes of tiger parenting. To move things along, I'll summarize. What happens to those Asian overachievers? Asian Americans make up 5% of the population, but only 0.3% of corporate officers, and only about 1% of corporate board members, 2% of college presidents. In Silicon Valley, Asian Americans make up a third of all software engineers, but only 6% of board members, and only about 10% of corporate officers of the Bay Area's 25 largest companies. Why? Why is there what is called the bamboo ceiling. Let's go back to Sean's audio feed to find out.
People have called this the bamboo ceiling. This was, the glass ceiling. So the question is why? What happened to all the Asian geniuses? And we can find a great deal of this answer in actually what we said were the strengths of tiger parenting, right? But also, in my mind, reflect very fundamental weaknesses. Asian tiger parenting is hierarchical, but because of that, it also makes you afraid to challenge authority. You don't want to tell your boss that you've got this great idea if he's missed it. You don't want to tell him he's messed up if he's messed up, right? You don't want to challenge someone you see in a position of authority because you think this might get you in trouble. It's strict. It makes you afraid to take risks. And we've talked a lot about how the freedom to fail and having the courage to fail is a great part of genius, right? It lets you try really daring, new, innovative stuff. And if you don't have this because you've been told not to take risks your entire life, this is a major disadvantage. And because Asian parenting is so focused, it can also blinker you. It can narrow your interests, right? I mean, Amy Chua gave the example of how her kids were made to concentrate on academics. They couldn't be in a school play or be on a sports team or be in the drama club, stuff like that. And so that they could, who knows, they might have been really good at sports, really good at art, really good at drama, but because of they were never given the chance to explore it, that interest never developed. Also, possible vocations, right? I mean, the typical Asian parent would tell their kids, you should concentrate on, you could be a lawyer, doctor, engineer, or a banker, right? And the rest, you shouldn't really care too much about. So a lot of, kids actually do take this advice, and they end up or overlooking things that they could have been really interested in and they could really have excelled in. Because Asian parenting is also results orientated, and Amy Chua writes that it's not important to make learning fun. You just have to make them do it. This results in many kids being not really passionate about what they do. Because of this, you're prone to burnout, right? When you don't have that tiger mom looming over you in college, or when you go out to work, you tend to lose your motivation because it was imposed externally from someone else rather than being.
Keeping that point in mind, is the genius externally or internally motivated? Can you make someone a genius, or does it have to come from within? All right. Finally, Sean goes on in his presentation to briefly analyze the cultures of 3 specific Asian countries: Singapore, China, and Japan. Let me now work through his slides. He starts with Singapore, which he says is noted for its hyper-competitiveness, staggering emphasis on education. Its universities are viewed as some of the best in Asia. It has one of the highest PISA rankings, high school test scores measured by country. It comes in second only to China. Students in the United States, however, are in 25th place. But despite the high levels of academic accomplishment in Singapore, there are low levels of creativity and innovation. As Guy Kawasaki, U.S. venture capitalist from Silicon Valley, has said, comparing Singapore and Israel, quote, Israel has 5 million people, 6 million entrepreneurs, and 15 million opinions. Singapore has 5 million people, 6 entrepreneurs, and 1 opinion, end quote. Why? Well, the emphasis on memorization and rote learning, Singapore's exam meritocracy, social pressures to conform, make safe choices, and refrain from rocking the boat, tight government control at almost every level of society. Dissent is punished. Subservience is valued above intellect. Sean then goes on to China. Here there is a staggering emphasis on education. Chinese scientists publish more scientific papers than U.S. scientists by a ratio of 5 to 4. China tops the world in PISA rankings, but the percentage of population with some university education is still only at 15% compared to 39% in other developed countries. The quality of Chinese scientific research is relatively poor compared to the U.S. Compare the 94% efficacy rate of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines with the approximately 50 to 79% efficacy rate of the Sinopharm vaccine, for example, which does not use the newer mRNA technology. China can only claim 9 Nobel laureates to date compared to America's 388. Statistics as of 2020. Why? The command and control model in Chinese universities. University administration is tightly controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. Application essays and extracurricular activities are given little weight in university admissions. The Gaokao exam system, the Chinese equivalent of the SAT test, well, it encourages rote memorization instead of understanding and critical thinking. It doesn't teach students how to think, only teaches them how to take a test. Again, this is a person, Sean Tan, who has spent most of his life living within a Chinese culture. Finally, Japan. Japan, too, is very hierarchical, strict and focused. Rigid hierarchies and social structures, well, difficult to question your superiors, for example. Rigid school system. They have passive learnings. You can't skip grades. There is an escalator system. Rigid employment. There is lifetime employment. There is nepotism. There's the stigma attached to switching jobs mid-career. It's insular. Japanese is the exclusive language. There's a bias against hiring foreign-educated Japanese citizens. It's engineered to maximize predictability and reliability. Thus, Japan should be, according to Sean, the place where creativity goes to die. But as he points out, it isn't. The Japanese are very creative, and Japan seems to have more than its share of geniuses. Japan has 10% of China's population, but has 25 Nobel laureates to China's 9. Tokyo University is frequently ranked among the best universities in Asia. The Japanese have an invention for everything. Japan is a center for fashion and music. There are many creative Japanese writers. Even their comics and cartoons can be very creative and thought-provoking, as you see. Why, one might ask, why? Why does creativity emerge from such a uniform society as Japan? Sean notes that all of the Japanese Nobel Prizes have come since 1949, after the occupation of Japan by American troops, which lasted until 1952. Sean suggests that with American troops came a Western university system, but far more important, with American troops came a democratic form of government, one that allows for freedom of speech and thus a spirit of inquiry that attends a free dissemination of ideas. From all that I've read, and Craig, I can only one vote here and I only one reader, but from what I read, China, as opposed to Japan, does not allow ideas to flow freely. The Chinese Communist Party regulates the dissemination of information. Recently, it was announced, just by way of one small example, that the Communist Party had banned the world-trusted British broadcasting company, the BBC, from broadcasting in China. In China, there is censorship of the press, censorship of radio and television, and of the internet. And because I'm saying these words to you, my friends, about free speech or the lack thereof in China, likely this session of our course, and possibly this entire course on Coursera, will be banned in China. In fact, Sean Tan tells me that if you want to watch these Coursera courses in mainland China, usually you have to do so by means of an external, virtual private network. It can skirt around Chinese censorship. The creation and control of a uniform population can be a great advantage in times of national emergency, as we saw during the COVID epidemic. On the other hand, during normal times, the lack of control, empowering a highly diverse, sometimes even chaotic society, may lead to greater individual and national creativity, as Sean Tan's statistics suggest. On this point, psychologist Keith Sawyer has said bluntly in his book, Group Genius, quote, "Group genius can only happen if the brains in the group don't contain all the same stuff," end quote. Thus, the drivers of genius may not only be what's inside the individual's head, but also the structure of the larger political system. In that sense, it may be an act of genius of a society to set up an environment in which individual genius can flourish. So, be a genius. Set up your own environment in which genius can thrive by debating yes or no the following proposition. Genius best flourishes in societies that promote and protect the free exchange of diverse ideas.